One morning, the wife disappeared without a trace. Her absence sent shockwaves through the community, sparking frantic searches and raising questions that no one could yet answer. Her husband claimed she had gone for an early morning run, something she did regularly. But something about his story felt off. But these were only pieces of a puzzle that, when fully assembled, revealed a terrifying truth. The story would forever leave a haunting impression, echoing the heartbreaking reality that sometimes the people we trust the most can lead us down a path of unimaginable darkness. A woman who refused to submit to her partner's controlling, repressive rules. She sought her freedom, a life without the suffocating restrictions placed upon her by her partner. Tragically, her rebellion against this abusive dynamic cost her everything. Her life was cut short, and the question that lingers is whether there was a clear pattern of abuse in this family, or whether the public simply needed someone to blame. Someone to hold responsible for this senseless tragedy. Was the husband truly an abuser, or was he painted as such to provide an easy answer for the wife's murder? It all started in the town of Cary, North Carolina, USA. Cary is the kind of place where people feel so secure that, after living there for a while, they stop locking their cars, and some even leave their front doors unlocked. It's a town devoid of crime, with no visible racial tensions, great schools, smooth roads, and friendly neighbors who always greet each other with a smile. This seemingly idyllic town was the place Brad and Nancy Cooper chose to build their life, raise their family, and pursue happiness. To the outside world, the Coopers appeared to have it all. Brad was a smart and successful IT engineer, and Nancy was everything you'd expect in a loving, dedicated mother. She was athletic, beautiful, lively, and devoted to her two young daughters. Together, Brad and Nancy led a quiet, peaceful life. Or so it seemed. Brad focused on his work, while Nancy took care of the household and the children. A former competitive runner, Nancy made a point of staying in great shape and taking care of her health. But beneath this perfect exterior, something much darker was brewing, something that would ultimately lead to unimaginable heartbreak. July 12, 2008, started out like any other Saturday morning for the Cooper family. Nancy went out for her usual morning run, something she did regularly as part of her commitment to staying fit. But on that day, she didn't come back. What followed was a series of events that were disturbing, perplexing, and filled with unanswered questions. The story is so tragic that it left everyone, family, friends, and even strangers who followed the case, with an overwhelming sense of loss and a desperate hope for justice. That afternoon, Nancy's close friend Jessica Adam called emergency services, her voice trembling as she reported Nancy missing. Jessica explained that Nancy had gone for a run at 7 a.m. and had not returned. The two friends had plans to meet later that morning, but Nancy never showed up. Jessica had been trying to reach her friend for hours, calling both Nancy's cell phone and her home phone, but received no response. Meanwhile, Brad, who was at work, appeared unconcerned by his wife's disappearance. He assumed Nancy had simply gone for a longer walk than usual and would return soon. Yet, as the day wore on and Nancy remained missing, alarm bells started to ring. In trying to understand where Nancy might have gone, we need to look more closely at the history of the Cooper family. Perhaps by examining the past, we can uncover some answers, some clues that might explain the tragedy that unfolded. Nancy Rentz was born on October 25, 1973, into a family that prided itself on loving and supporting others. In the 1960s, Harry Renz and Donna Audrey, both graduates of the University of British Columbia, decided to marry and build a life together. They eventually had 4 children, a son, Jeff, and 3 daughters, Krista, Jill, and Nancy. The family lived in Edmonton, Alberta, and Harry and Donna raised their children in a home filled with warmth, love, and encouragement. In 1988, Harry and Donna started an employment agency, helping individuals in Alberta with life management skills, job training, and employment services. They were a family deeply rooted in community and service, offering help to others while nurturing a supportive environment for their children. In 1998, when Nancy was just 25 years old, she met Brad Cooper in Calgary. He was tall, dark-haired, and exuded a calm, steady presence, qualities that immediately drew her in. But it wasn't just Brad's looks that captivated Nancy. It was his reliability, his unwavering demeanor, and his ability to remain grounded even in stressful situations. Nancy, in contrast, was vibrant, tall, blonde, and physically fit. She had a quiet charisma that lit up a room, a quality that piqued Brad's interest. The mutual attraction quickly blossomed into a serious relationship. Their romance moved fast. When Brad was offered a prestigious job at Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina, he asked Nancy to move with him. Wanting to be together and recognizing the difficulties that immigration would pose, they decided to marry in the fall of 2000, speeding up their marriage plans originally set for 2002. Their union, while on the surface driven by love, was also tied to the practicalities of moving across borders. However, it seemed like a logical next step for two people in love, ready to build a life together in a new country. Once in North Carolina, Brad's career took a sharp turn for the better. He quickly made a name for himself as a networking expert, working as an engineer and architect. With his career taking off, the Coopers lived a comfortable and successful life. Brad's accomplishments were impressive. He specialized in integrating internet technologies and phones, becoming one of just 152 experts in his field globally. This expertise secured the couple's financial stability, allowing them to enjoy a comfortable suburban life. The Coopers had their own house, complete with 2 luxury BMW parked in the driveway. On the outside, it seemed like they had achieved the American dream. But inside their home, Nancy's life told a different story. Although she had moved to the U.S. to be with Brad, her dreams and ambitions were put on hold. Nancy, still a Canadian citizen, was unable to work legally without a permit. The immigration system that had allowed her to move with Brad now confined her to the role of a stay-at-home mom. And while she loved her daughters, Bella, born in 2004, and Katie, born in 2006, Nancy longed for something more. She wanted a career, a purpose beyond being a wife and mother. The neighborhood saw Nancy as a loving, attentive mother. She was frequently spotted at the local playground, playing with her daughters and engaging with other moms. She was deeply involved in her children's lives, and to an outsider, it seemed like she had everything. But internally, Nancy struggled. She had once been a competitive runner, training to compete in the Olympics before a knee injury shattered that dream. Even after her Olympic hopes faded, she remained passionate about running, participating in marathons and helping others find joy in the sport. Running was her release, her connection to the part of herself that hadn't yet faded. However, Brad, an introvert, disliked Nancy's growing social circle. Her friendships with other runners, her involvement in races, and the joy she derived from those relationships irked him. As Nancy continued to build a life for herself outside of the home, through her running community and her friendships, the cracks in her marriage to Brad began to show. Friends close to the couple noted that their relationship had issues from the beginning, but Nancy rarely spoke openly about their problems. Instead, she painted an idealized version of her husband, never revealing the depth of their marital strife. Brad's need for control manifested in small ways at first, ways that could be easily overlooked. He made decisions for Nancy without consulting her, controlled the family finances, and became more critical of her choices. Over time, these behaviors escalated, slowly chipping away at Nancy's independence and self-worth. While Brad advanced professionally, Nancy's life felt smaller and more confined. Her desire to work, to contribute beyond the home, was stifled by legal and practical barriers. The isolation of being a stay-at-home mom without a career to call her own weighed heavily on her. As Nancy's marriage to Brad grew more strained, she began to find solace in her running community. Running was one of the few things she still had control over, and it connected her to people who valued her for more than just being Brad's wife or Bella and Katie's mom. But her efforts to carve out a space for herself in this new world only exacerbated the tension in her marriage. Brad's introverted nature and need for control made it difficult for him to accept Nancy's newfound social life, and he became increasingly resentful of her friendships and her time away from home. The tension between them reached a boiling point as Brad's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced. His once steady and calm demeanor morphed into something more sinister. A quiet, insidious form of control that left Nancy feeling trapped. She had given up so much for their life together, but it was never enough for Brad. As he continued to climb the corporate ladder, his expectations of Nancy only grew more unrealistic. He wanted her to fit into a narrow mold of what he believed a wife and mother should be, and any deviation from that mold was met with criticism or disapproval. Nancy's life, once full of potential and dreams, had become suffocating. She had entered the marriage with hopes of building a life together, but instead, she found herself living in Brad's shadow, her own identity slowly eroding. Yet she kept up appearances, continuing to be the perfect wife and mother in public, while privately struggling to hold on to the pieces of herself that remained. In the end, Nancy's attempts to assert her independence, through running, through her friendships, through her desire for more than what Brad offered, only deepened the rift in their relationship. What began as a promising love story had turned into a prison for Nancy, one in which she had to constantly navigate Brad's growing need for control and his diminishing respect for her. The marriage that had once been full of promise was now suffused with tension, manipulation, and an overwhelming sense of loss for the woman Nancy once was. Things took a darker turn in Nancy Cooper's marriage when she discovered that her husband, Brad, had been unfaithful with someone she considered a close friend. In the spring of 2007, Nancy learned about Brad's affair with Heather, a revelation that shattered any remaining trust she had in him. Heather wasn't just a stranger. She was someone from Nancy's inner circle, which made the betrayal all the more painful. At first, Brad denied the affair, sticking to his story for months, but the truth eventually came out. On New Year's Eve, during what should have been a celebratory time, Brad confessed to the affair but minimized it, claiming it had only happened once, as if that fact somehow softened the blow. His attempt to downplay the situation by suggesting that one time didn't count was not only insulting, but a clear indication of how little he understood or cared about the emotional wreckage he had caused. In an attempt to salvage their marriage, the couple decided to try therapy. But during those sessions, Brad's lies unraveled even further. He admitted that the affair had been ongoing for a long time and that he had kept it from Nancy in a desperate attempt to maintain their image of a normal family. This second confession broke whatever fragile bond was left between them. The betrayal was too deep, the trust too fractured. Therapy, instead of saving their marriage, only revealed more secrets, and they eventually decided to separate. It became clear that their relationship had reached its endpoint. As part of their separation, the couple agreed to sell their home and divide their assets. Nancy planned to move back to Canada with their daughters, Bella and Katie, hoping to start fresh with the support of her family. Her dreams of returning to her homeland offered her a chance at rebuilding her life, far from the heartbreak and suffocation she felt in North Carolina. But Brad wasn't willing to let her leave so easily, especially when it came to their children. He had no intention of giving up custody or allowing the girls to move to Canada with their mother. What had started as a bitter end to their marriage turned into a custody battle. Brad, fueled by resentment and a need to maintain control, took drastic steps to prevent Nancy from leaving. In a calculated move, Brad canceled Nancy's credit cards, cutting her off financially. Without access to funds, Nancy was trapped. Alone in a foreign country, without money and with 2 young children to care for, Nancy faced a daunting and isolating reality. Brad's actions left her vulnerable, with no clear way out. Her once promising life had now become a struggle for basic survival. It was in the midst of this escalating turmoil that Nancy disappeared. When word spread about the Coopers' rocky marriage and impending separation, friends, neighbors, and the authorities immediately turned their suspicions toward Brad. The timing of her disappearance was too coincidental, given the bitter conflicts over their children and the power Brad still held over her life. Nancy's parents, Harry and Donna Renz, were devastated when they received the news that their daughter was missing. They knew she had been planning to return to Canada with her daughters, but now they were gripped by fear. In the hours following Nancy's disappearance, police arrived at the Cooper household to question Brad. His account of the morning raised more questions than answers. According to Brad, Nancy had woken up earlier than usual on Saturday and left for a run with a friend. Brad claimed that she hadn't taken her cell phone or house keys with her, a detail that struck the police as odd. Nancy was a seasoned runner, training for a half marathon, and she had a set routine. She usually met her running partner at a nearby coffee shop before starting her jog. Yet, according to Brad, she had deviated from this routine on the day she disappeared, choosing to run on an unfamiliar path without notifying anyone. The more the police probed, the more skeptical they became of Brad's story. No one had seen Nancy leave that morning. In fact, the last time anyone other than Brad saw her was the previous evening when she was visiting a friend across the street. There were no witnesses to confirm Brad's claim that Nancy had left the house at 7 a.m., and no one saw her jogging in the neighborhood that day. Suspicion grew as the hours passed, and friends and family began to fear the worst. A search party was quickly organized to find Nancy. Could she have run away to escape her troubled marriage? Her friends didn't think so. Nancy was devoted to her children, and there was no way she would have left without taking Bella and Katie with her. As the search intensified, those closest to Nancy hoped she had simply gone off the grid for a while, perhaps seeking a temporary escape from her tumultuous home life. But as the days wore on, their hope faded, replaced by a growing dread. On July 14, 2008, just 2 days after Nancy was reported missing, the search came to a tragic end. A man walking his dog discovered a woman's body in a drainage ditch, approximately 3 miles from the Cooper home. The body was lying face down in the water, partially submerged in the ditch. The woman was wearing a sports bra, and a single diamond earring was still in one ear. The man immediately called the police, who arrived on the scene and identified the body as Nancy Cooper. The autopsy revealed that Nancy had been strangled to death, her hyoid bone broken, a common injury in cases of manual strangulation. The medical examiner found no signs of sexual assault, but the brutal manner of her death left no doubt that this was a homicide. Nancy's once promising life had been violently taken, and the question on everyone's mind was, who would want to kill her? With Nancy's body discovered and the cause of death confirmed as strangulation, investigators shifted their focus to finding the person responsible. The most obvious suspect was Brad. He had motive: his anger over their impending separation and custody battle, his financial control over Nancy, and the recent uncovering of his affair. Friends of Nancy told police that she had been fearful of Brad in the weeks leading up to her death, worried that his manipulative behavior was becoming more aggressive. As the investigation continued, more and more circumstantial evidence seemed to point to Brad. His behavior during Nancy's disappearance was scrutinized, and many people began to wonder whether his calm, collected demeanor was a facade hiding something darker. The unraveling of the Cooper marriage, marked by infidelity, control, and bitterness, appeared to have culminated in an unspeakable tragedy. But proving Brad's guilt would require more than suspicion. It would require concrete evidence that could link him to the murder of his wife. When police first interviewed Brad Cooper on the day his wife Nancy went missing, they observed several small red marks and scratches on the back of his neck. This detail was noted in the police report but left unexplained. Brad didn't offer a reason for the scratches, and investigators didn't press him for one at that moment. Nonetheless, this seemingly minor observation would later become a piece of the puzzle in the investigation into Nancy Cooper's mysterious disappearance and death. Another significant point was that no one, other than Brad, had seen Nancy after she left the Friday night party at a neighbor's house, which she attended alone. In the early stages of their investigation, Brad Cooper naturally became their primary focus. After all, the husband is often the first suspect in homicide investigations, particularly in cases involving a missing spouse. And Brad had been the last person to claim to have seen Nancy alive. The tension between the couple's recent marital issues, marked by Brad's affair and the couple's pending separation, only intensified the scrutiny on Brad. Detectives felt that the circumstances surrounding Nancy's disappearance were too suspicious to ignore. On the surface, Brad seemed cooperative and calm, but the more police dug into the details of his account, the more inconsistencies began to surface. A series of overnight warrants were issued to search the Coopers' home, their 2 cars, and Brad himself. The urgency with which the police treated the home and vehicles as potential crime scenes indicated they believed that time was of the essence. They used luminol to search for bloodstains and combed the residence for any traces of evidence that might link Brad to Nancy's death. In addition to these searches, investigators collected Brad's hair, fingerprints, and DNA samples for comparison against any evidence they might find either at the crime scene or on Nancy's body. One of the complexities of this investigation stemmed from the fact that Brad and Nancy had shared a life. They lived in the same house, used the same cars, and touched many of the same items daily. Any evidence found would first need to be contextualized within the framework of a married couple living under one roof. However, some details uncovered during the investigation raised eyebrows. For instance, on the morning Nancy disappeared, Brad told police that he had spent his time cleaning the house. He had done laundry, vacuumed, and mopped the floors. Investigators found this odd, especially considering Nancy had not returned from her run, and no one knew where she was. More peculiar still was Brad's admission that he had purchased bleach and other cleaning supplies the day before. While it's not uncommon for people to clean their homes regularly, the timing of Brad's sudden deep cleaning spree on the very day his wife vanished seemed suspicious to law enforcement. Investigators later took several boxes and bags of potential evidence from the Cooper household, all of which would need to be processed to see if any of it was connected to Nancy's death. Among these items were cleaning supplies, some of Brad's clothing, and a variety of household items. Brad's explanation for the thorough cleaning he undertook didn't sit well with investigators. According to written police testimony, Brad's story didn't align with interviews from friends and neighbors who knew the couple well. These friends claimed Brad had never been particularly fastidious about cleaning during their marriage. Another curious detail emerged when police discovered that Brad had cleaned the trunk of Nancy's car but left the interior untouched. When questioned about this, Brad claimed that he had spilled gasoline in the trunk and needed to clean it out. Yet investigators found no traces of gasoline or any cleaning fluid smell in the trunk. This strange inconsistency further heightened police suspicions about Brad's potential involvement in Nancy's disappearance. By this time, investigators had built a strong enough case to consider Brad Cooper the prime suspect in Nancy's death. The couple's personal life was dissected by police and prosecutors, revealing that both Brad and Nancy, Canadian citizens, had been in the process of a bitter separation. Nancy had made plans to move back to Canada with their 2 daughters, Bella and Katie, while Brad was unwilling to let her go without a fight. In April 2008, just months before Nancy's death, Brad had removed Nancy's name from their joint bank accounts and canceled her credit cards, effectively cutting her off financially. He also took possession of the children's passports, preventing her from leaving the country with the kids. As the investigation deepened, detectives turned their attention to Brad's computer. In high-profile cases such as this one, a suspect's digital footprint often reveals clues about their mindset and potential actions. Detectives searched Brad's computer for evidence that might indicate premeditation, looking for documents or internet searches on how to kill someone or dispose of a body. While Brad's background as a tech-savvy individual made the search more complicated, investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned. During cross-examination in court, Detective Adam Dismukes testified about certain aspects of the crime scene that suggested foul play. Specifically, the front hallway of the Cooper home raised red flags. Dismukes noted that the hallway's condition seemed indicative of a possible struggle, one that might have taken place when Nancy returned from the party the night before she was reported missing. Could this have been the location where Nancy's life was violently taken? As evidence mounted against Brad, his calm and collected demeanor started to crack. It became clear that the investigation was building a compelling narrative. Brad, embroiled in a failing marriage, fearful of losing custody of his children, and frustrated by his wife's plans to leave the country, had been driven to a violent and irreversible act. The affair, financial disputes, and control issues all painted a picture of a man desperate to maintain his grip on a life that was slipping through his fingers. Yet, despite all this circumstantial evidence, no one could definitively place Brad at the scene of Nancy's death. The prosecution would need more than suspicion to convict him. They needed concrete proof, something that would irrefutably tie Brad to the murder. Investigators were confident that such proof existed, whether it was hidden in the house, the cars, or the digital data retrieved from Brad's computer. But as the investigation continued, Brad remained a free man, albeit one under intense scrutiny. Public opinion swayed heavily against him. In the quiet town of Cary, North Carolina, the brutal murder of Nancy Cooper had shocked the community, and many believed justice had not yet been served. Friends of Nancy, who had witnessed the unraveling of her marriage and the toll it had taken on her, were vocal in their belief that Brad was responsible for her death. However, the legal system would demand more than belief. It would demand proof, and for now, that proof was still being pieced together by law enforcement. As investigators pored over the evidence from the Cooper home, examining dozens of photos taken while the case was still being treated as a missing person investigation, defense attorney Howard Kurtz mounted a vigorous challenge to the prosecution's case. Kurtz, representing Brad Cooper, methodically questioned Detective Adam Dismukes, aiming to create doubt that the evidence pointed to Brad's guilt in the murder of his wife, Nancy Cooper. One point of contention involved the photos of the Cooper home, specifically the foyer area. Some of the photographs showed small decorative items, such as bamboo sticks in a vase and a pair of decorative ducks that had been on a credenza, missing between the afternoon of July 11, 2008, when Nancy had been home, and the next day when the investigation commenced. These items, police believed, may have been displaced during a struggle between Brad and Nancy. Kurtz, however, was quick to argue that the scene didn't support the idea of a violent altercation. He pointed out that other items, such as a lamp in the hallway, remained undisturbed. There were no scuff marks or obvious signs of a struggle on the floor. Additionally, Kurtz emphasized that many other objects in the house had not been touched. The glass coffee table in the living room, for example, was intact, with no signs of disarray. Similarly, the couple's home office, including the computer equipment that Brad used regularly, was undisturbed. This careful line of questioning aimed to weaken the prosecution's assertion that a struggle occurred in the home, suggesting instead that the house remained in normal order. Despite the defense's effort to cast doubt on the evidence, the prosecution argued that the signs were clear. During a later interview, Brad Cooper acknowledged that he felt the investigators had already marked him as their prime suspect. Based on police testimony, Brad had strangled Nancy in their home on the morning of July 12, 2008, after she returned from a neighbor's party. He then transported her body and dumped it a few miles away, where it was later discovered. "I believe Nancy Cooper came home early on the morning of July 12, and Mr. Cooper killed her," Detective Dismukes testified, summarizing the police's theory of the crime. With enough circumstantial evidence in hand, Brad Cooper was arrested in October 2008, over 3 months after Nancy's body was found in a drainage ditch, approximately 3 miles from their home in Cary, North Carolina. His trial, however, did not begin until more than 2 years later, in March 2011, during which both the prosecution and defense presented their cases in a trial that would stretch over 36 days. The prosecution leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence, bolstered by testimony from friends and family who detailed Brad and Nancy's turbulent marriage. Brad, they argued, had become increasingly controlling and abusive as the couple's relationship deteriorated. Nancy, who had once been financially dependent on Brad due to her inability to work in the United States without a visa, was gradually seeking independence. She had expressed a desire to return to Canada with their 2 daughters and start over, away from the crumbling marriage and Brad's manipulative behavior. The prosecution also pointed to Brad's affair as a motive. Brad's infidelity, which had initially come to light in early 2007, had rocked the marriage, and while the couple had attempted therapy, the damage had already been done. Nancy's friends testified that she had planned to divorce Brad and return to Canada with the children, but Brad's desire to control the situation and prevent her from leaving boiled over. According to the prosecution, Brad's increasing frustration, fear of losing his children, and the prospect of an expensive divorce led him to commit murder to solve his problems once and for all. The prosecution's case was bolstered by digital evidence from Brad's computer. 2 FBI agents, Special Agents Gregory Johnson and Chris Chappelle, testified that Brad had conducted internet searches for maps of the exact area where Nancy's body was found. This discovery was pivotal in convincing the jury that Brad had not only killed his wife, but had planned how to dispose of her body in a place he believed would be difficult to find. Jury foreman Andy Gilbert later revealed that this testimony was critical in helping the jurors connect the dots. The evidence presented by the FBI agents made a lot of the other circumstantial evidence more relevant and credible. Gilbert said after the trial, "Nearly 100 witnesses had testified, and the trial spanned over a month as prosecutors painstakingly laid out their case that Brad, an angry and frustrated man, had coldly and calculatingly murdered his wife in the early hours of July 12, 2008. According to prosecutors, Brad had been having affairs with several women at the time of Nancy's death, including a neighbor. Nancy, on the other hand, had been trying to escape the marriage. Court documents revealed that Brad had attempted suicide multiple times as a teenager, and again more recently in the winter before Nancy's death. Throughout the trial, Brad Cooper maintained his innocence, but it took the jury of 10 women and 2 men 10 hours to reach a unanimous verdict of first-degree murder. On May 5, 2011, Brad was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It marked the conclusion of Wake County's longest non-death penalty murder trial. Brad Cooper's defense team firmly believed that they had a strong case for appealing his conviction. They argued that crucial evidence was withheld from the jury, particularly regarding Brad's laptop. According to the defense, the laptop had been tampered with, possibly compromising the digital evidence that played a significant role in the prosecution's case. This, they claimed, was one of several ignored avenues in the investigation that could have cast doubt on Brad's guilt. They argued that investigators had tunnel vision, focusing solely on the Brad did it theory, while disregarding other potential leads that could have identified Nancy's real killer or killers. In 2013, he appealed to have his conviction overturned, citing errors in the trial, particularly regarding the admission of certain evidence. His defense argued that the FBI digital evidence was improperly presented and should not have been allowed. However, while his conviction was reviewed, the case was not retried in full. But in 2015, a twist occurred. At the age of 40, Brad Cooper pleaded guilty in Wake County Superior Court to the second-degree murder of his wife, Nancy, bringing an end to years of legal battles. During his court appearance, Brad finally acknowledged his actions in public. When asked by the judge if he killed Nancy and dumped her body in a ditch in Cary, North Carolina in 2008, Brad answered, "Yes." This marked the first time he had openly admitted to the crime in a court of law, something he had vehemently denied for years. He had initially been convicted of first-degree murder in 2011, but in a significant development, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned that conviction. The reason? There were concerns about the fairness of his trial, particularly surrounding the digital evidence and the manner in which it had been presented to the jury. As a result, Brad was given a new deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. This plea, however, effectively ended his fight for custody of his daughters, as he forfeited his parental rights. Nancy's twin sister was awarded custody of the 2 girls. Judge Paul Gessner sentenced him to 12 years in prison, with credit given for the 5 years he had already served. This reduced sentence marked a stark contrast to his original life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was a bittersweet resolution for both the prosecution and Nancy's family. While Brad's confession provided the closure, they sought an admission of guilt. It also meant that he would eventually be released from prison. The unfaithful husband who had strangled his wife in a moment of rage, then dumped her body in a drainage ditch, would not spend the rest of his life behind bars as initially believed. Brad Cooper served his 12-year sentence at the Mountain View Correctional Institution in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. On November 23, 2020, he was released from prison, having completed his time behind bars. However, his release didn't mean freedom. Immediately upon leaving the correctional facility, Brad was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. As a Canadian citizen, he was deported back to Canada, where he now reportedly lives.
A rising star's life was cut tragically short, setting off a chain of events that left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her. Her passion was not only to win races, but to inspire others, change the world, and create an inclusive environment within her sport. She was a beacon of light, known for her kindness, determination, and the impact she had on everyone around her. One fateful night, an unexplained crime shattered the peace, leaving a community in mourning and law enforcement racing against time to catch the perpetrator. The investigation led them into a complex web of relationships, jealousy, and deceit. The prime suspect, once close to the victim, became the subject of a nationwide manhunt. The perpetrator's actions after the crime were nothing short of daring, as he meticulously planned his escape, evading capture for months. An escape attempt only added to the sensationalism of the case, highlighting a relentless drive to evade justice. The subsequent trial was a dramatic standoff, with prosecutors laying out a damning timeline of events and defense attorneys citing circumstantial evidence and acts of fear. Amid the legal battles, the victim's family and friends sought solace in her memory. This is a story about ambition, betrayal, cruelty, and resilience about human nature. Eric and Karen Wilson had a daughter named Anna Mariah Wilson on May 18, 1996. They were a close-knit family who liked to be busy and be outside. She was driven and focused as a child. Her mother said she was quiet and determined, and her friends said she was confident in a humble and polite way. Anna has always been very picky about things being just right. The head of the school asked her how she was going to deal with her need to be perfect when she was in the 7th grade, her mother said. She said she would start with a clean plate. While her mom knew her daughter meant blank slate, she thought plate was much cuter. Anna grew up near the Kingdom Trails in Vermont, which is great for cross-country skiing and mountain biking. Eric, her dad, was on the U.S. ski team and raced. Karen, her mother, teaches people how to ride bikes. And Laura Wilson Todd, her aunt, cross-country skied in 2 Olympics. Those were the sports that Anna liked as well. Burke Mountain Academy is a private high school in Vermont that prepares students for college by focusing on teaching alpine ski racers. Anna went there. By the end of her 2nd year, she was named 3rd in the country for her age group in giant slalom. Then she tore the ligament in her knee. She started cycling to help heal an injured ACL, but she quickly found a new love. She wanted to become a professional cyclist. In 2019, she earned her degree in engineering. She started working in business at Specialized, a company that designs and makes bikes. In her free time, she was climbing the ranks of professional riding. Anna used to mountain bike when she was a kid, but she had never done gravel cycling before. In gravel cycling, you ride on uneven roads made up of open gravel, dirt tracks, and other surfaces. But after just 3 years of mountain and gravel bike racing, she was the most successful professional off-road biker in the United States. She was known for how hard she could climb. Everyone thought Anna would soon be the best bike rider in the country, if not the world. Professional racers need more than just wins, though. They also need sponsors to continue doing this. Colt Strickland and Anna met at a bike race in Idaho in September 2021. Since Colin had gotten sponsors like Red Bull, Allied Cycle Works, Rafa, and more, they got to know each other, and Colin taught her how to get sponsors. Colin was seeing a woman named Caitlin Marie Armstrong at the time they met. Caitlin was born on November 21, 1987, and grew up in Livonia, Michigan. She was fun, friendly, and athletic there. She won Best Hair in high school for her class of 2005. She then went to Eastern Michigan University after going to the community college. After that, she went to work in business, then became a real estate agent. And on the side, she became a certified yoga teacher and taught yoga. Colin and Caitlin met in 2019 on a relationship app. After they met, Caitlin became interested in riding bikes. To be like Colin, she got hooked on it and started racing for fun. The couple kept seeing each other even though things went up and down. Following record-breaking freezes in Texas in the winter of 2021, the couple moved in together after Caitlin's apartment flooded. They also started a company called Wheelhouse Mobile to fix up old trailers. In October of that year, a month after Colin met Anna, they had one of their on-again, off-again times. Colin took Anna and some other professional female cyclists on a mountain bike ride without asking Caitlin. This caused a fight between the two. Caitlin and Colin were no longer together, but he did date Anna for a short time. At the same time, Caitlin was seeing other guys. Soon after, Colin and Caitlin chose to get back together. According to Colin, his relationship with Anna went back to being a friendship and work-related relationship. Less than a year later, on May 10, 2022, a few weeks shy of her 26th birthday, Anna traveled to Austin, Texas, ahead of a race that was to take place in nearby Hico, Texas. the Gravel Locos bike race. Anna was favored to win the race. She was staying at the apartment of her friend, Kane Cash. Once she was settled in, Anna contacted her friend Colin to see if he wanted to hang out. She texted him, "Do you have plans tonight?" He replied, "Want to go swimming? Maybe swimming in a beverage?" It was a plan. The two met up a few hours later. They went swimming in a local swimming pool, then headed to a place called Pool Burger for a bite. Then Colin dropped Anna back off at her friend's apartment and headed back home. But tragically, that would be the last time he would see Anna alive. It was a little after 8:30 in the evening. Kane Cash, the friend Anna was staying with, was away that evening herself. When the friend got home around 10 p.m., what she saw was unthinkable. She found her friend lifeless on the bathroom floor. She immediately called 911 as she began CPR, but her friend had been dead over 45 minutes by that point. Police arrived, and the news of the killing began making headlines. When officers arrived, they found the victim had gunshot wounds. EMS provided life-saving measures, but the woman later died from her injuries. Police do not know how long she was inside the home, but did call her death suspicious. It is unclear if a gun was found on scene. Cash shared that the only thing she noticed missing from the apartment was Anna racing bike. Police would later find it discarded in a bamboo patch near the apartment, with nearby surveillance footage capturing a black Jeep SUV with a bike rack on the back leaving the area that evening. Once police learned that Anna was dropped off a few hours earlier by Colin Strickland, they wanted to pay him a visit. Upon arrival at his home the next morning, in his driveway, they noticed a black Jeep SUV with a bike rack on the back. They called him into the station, and he readily agreed. Once there, he was cooperative and transparent. He shared the history of his and Anna's 1 to 2 week romantic relationship the prior year. Throughout the interview, he spoke highly of Anna Mariah and her accomplishments, referring to her as the best female cyclist in the US and possibly the world. In contrast, when he referred to Caitlin Armstrong, he described her as a participant at bike races while he was a racer. He reported that he asked her not to ride with him because she holds him back. He also shared how Caitlin was an extremely jealous person to the point of calling Anna multiple times, telling her that Colin was her boyfriend, not Anna's, and to stay away from him. He said her jealousy was the source of countless arguments. He shared that after he and Caitlin got back together, he continued to keep in touch with Anna professionally, but had to delete any text messages they sent and save Anna's number under a fake name to avoid conflict since Caitlin had blocked Anna and other women's numbers from his phone in the past. He also acknowledged that he did not disclose to Caitlin that he was out with Anna the night of the murder and even lied to her, telling her he was elsewhere. He told them that the Jeep in the driveway belonged to Caitlin, but that she was not aware of where Anna was staying. He told police that he had bought handguns for both him and Caitlin after Caitlin had expressed concern for her personal safety while cycling alone. So now they wanted to have a talk with Caitlin Armstrong. As luck would have it, police discovered that there was an outstanding arrest warrant for Caitlin skipping out after a Botox treatment without paying. After her procedure, she had left her maxed out credit card with an employee, saying she would get another card from her car, but she never returned. Police brought her in on that warrant. Caitlin Armstrong was not cooperative during the interview. "What were you doing yesterday?" "I would like to leave," she replied. "Is there any explanation as far as why the vehicle would be over there?" "I would like to leave." Typically, innocent people are eager to share their lack of involvement and clear their names, but not Armstrong. It raised law enforcement suspicions even further. When detectives told her that her vehicle being in the area of the murder did not look good for her, she simply nodded her head in agreement, but offered no explanation as to why her vehicle would be there. When detectives told Armstrong that Colin and Anna had gone out together on the day of the murder, she told them, "I didn't have any idea that he saw or even went out with this girl as of recently." They suspected her involvement, but they wouldn't be able to hold her long. They were told that Armstrong's date of birth turned out to be wrong on the arrest warrant, rendering it invalid. So, without enough cause to charge her with anything else, they had to let her go. Then, within 3 days of the murder, police received calls from 2 of Armstrong's friends, both of whom said they had a conversation with Armstrong where she was extremely angry over what she felt was a romantic relationship between Anna and Colin. One of them stated that Armstrong was to the point of shaking with anger. Both recalled her saying that she wanted to kill Anna. One of the friends recalled Armstrong saying that she had either just purchased a gun or was going to. Neither took the threat seriously, attributing it to Armstrong's extreme emotional state at the time. Despite Colin's claim that he and Anna were only involved romantically during his brief breakup with Caitlin, evidence and statements started pointing toward more of an on-again, off-again relationship, at least around January of 2022. That is the time when Armstrong had the rage conversations with her friends about Colin seeing Anna. It's when she requested a gun from Strickland. And it's when Anna sent the following text to Strickland, which included, "This weekend was strange for me, and I just want to know what's going on. If you just want to be friends, seems to be the case, then that's cool, but I'd like to talk about it." It appeared to law enforcement that even if Strickland saw their relationship as platonic at that time, Anna did not. What was unraveling was that Strickland's name was associated with the crime. He acknowledged as much by posting a statement on social media expressing, "There is no way to adequately express the regret and torture I feel about my proximity to this horrible crime." That proximity acknowledgement triggered several of his sponsors to promptly drop him. Based on all the findings and evidence accumulated over the next few days, as well as later court testimonies, law enforcement was able to establish a clear picture of how the evening transpired. After Anna and Strickland went swimming to cool off on the 30-degree day, they stopped to eat at Pool Burger, where they were seen on the restaurant's surveillance camera. Their neutral interactions appeared to reflect the strictly platonic relationship they were having at the time, just as both Anna's family and Strickland maintained. After eating, Strickland drove Anna on his motorcycle to her friend's home. He dropped her off at 8:35 p.m., then left for home. 1 minute later, he pulled over and sent a text to Armstrong. "Hey, are you out? I went to drop some flowers for Allison at her son's house up north, and my phone died. Heading home unless you have another food suggestion." A minute later, a neighbor's doorbell camera captured Armstrong's black Jeep SUV pulling up to the house where Anna was staying. Shortly after that, camera shows the Jeep leaving. Turns out Armstrong actually did know where Anna was staying. She was using a fitness app called Strava, which cyclists use to track their bike ride data. It allowed Armstrong to track exactly where Anna was staying. Armstrong also had access to Strickland's Apple laptop login and password, and police documents speculate that she may have been reading his messages and knew exactly what the pair was up to. Evidence showed that Armstrong was actually following the pair for at least part of their outing. After Strickland dropped Anna off, Armstrong made her way into the home. She then shot Anna twice in the head, and then a few moments later stood over her and shot her again in the heart. One of the bullets also pierced her hand, which the medical examiner determined was likely the result of Anna putting her hands up to try to shield herself. Within minutes of dropping Anna off, Strickland was seen on his motorcycle some 8 miles away, logistically clearing him from any involvement in the shooting. He arrived home shortly after 9:21 p.m., and Armstrong was not there. When she arrived home later that evening, she was neither frazzled nor acting strange. She did, however, aggressively initiate intimacy with him, exhibiting unusually forceful behavior that he didn't mind at the time, but in hindsight says he feels traumatized by. When police came to Strickland the next morning and told him that Anna had been murdered, he was shocked. When he saw Armstrong again, he told her that he had been with Anna. Detectives said that her car was not far from the murder scene. When he asked her if this was true, she said that she had been to a waxing appointment, a yoga class, and a healer. He said that she had not been seen or heard from in days. A bicycle that had been dumped near the house had DNA on the handles that most likely matched Armstrong's. Police said that Armstrong either dumped the bike there to make it look like it had been stolen, or she saw it as a symbol of Anna or something important to her, and she wanted to take it away from her. Police also found that Armstrong's phone was not connected to any cell networks on the night of the murder. This means it was probably either turned off or in airplane mode. If your phone isn't on or linked to a network these days, you're probably either being a victim of a crime or committing one. This made police sure it was done on purpose. A phone that doesn't ring actually says a lot. And tests of the gun Strickland bought for Armstrong showed that it was very likely the murder weapon. A warrant for Armstrong's arrest for first-degree murder of Anna Mariah was issued on May 7th, 6 days after the shooting and 5 days after she left the interrogation. This was based on the proof they had gathered up to that point. It was too late, though. Caitlin Armstrong had run away and could not be found. Armstrong set up plans for the day after she was questioned. She sold her black Jeep to CarMax for $12,000. That gave her a nice amount of cash, but it looked like it was just extra money. Colin says that before the murder, he gave Armstrong $450,000 to put into an investment account that only she could access. This was more than enough money for her shady plans. While this was going on, the U.S. Marshals Lone Star Fugitive Task Force was sent to find and capture Armstrong. They found out that the order they thought was invalid because of the wrong date of birth was actually valid, and they could have done hold Armstrong on that warrant. They learned that she might have run away to New York to live with her sister. They found Christine Armstrong, her sister, and went to see her. Chris told them that Caitlin was there but then left. Armstrong took a bus from Austin to New York the day after she sold her car to go to her sister's. After a few days, Christine took her to the Newark, New Jersey airport so she could catch a flight back to Austin. After some time, though, Caitlin called Christine to tell her she had chosen not to fly back home, but instead drive 1,700 miles, 2,700 kilometers. Since then, Christine hadn't heard from her. The story about going back to Austin wasn't believed by the police. They looked to see if Caitlin Armstrong had any flights booked out, but none were found. But because her sister had said that her passport was missing, they asked Homeland Security to look for anyone going with the name Christine Armstrong. Christine Armstrong got on a one-way trip to Costa Rica, which meant they had a match. The sister's passport was used by Caitlin Armstrong to get away to Costa Rica. Armstrong got to Costa Rica ahead of the police by going around them first. The information that helped them find her allowed them to track her from afar, but it would take them a month to reach the country. By that time, Armstrong was being charged with murder plus unlawful flight to escape prosecution. A $21,000 reward was set for her capture. The fact that Armstrong was living in hostels in Costa Rica didn't help narrow down the search very much, since there are so many of them in the country. Then someone told them that Armstrong had met an American businessman there, so they called him. He initially hung up on them because he thought they were telemarketers or con artists. But after the third try, they were able to say that they were U.S. Marshals and were looking for a suspect named Caitlin Armstrong. While they were on the phone, they sent him a picture of her. He said that was the girl he met at a yoga studio in Jacko, even though it didn't look exactly like her. She went by the name Beth. He told them to look for her at a certain yoga studio in Jacko. The detectives were hopeful when they got to Costa Rica. They looked all over the Jacko area and watched hours of camera video, but they couldn't find anything. After that, they got one more lead. It was in Santa Teresa, a small town on the Pacific coast. The town was very small and full of American tourists. To the agent's horror, a lot of them looked like Caitlin Armstrong. They didn't think it would be that hard. Detectives made a lot of new friends, and people were calling them with any information. They met a diner owner from New York who lived in the area. He knew Armstrong, but said she used one of the many fake names they found she had. He told them she was trying to make a name for herself as a yoga teacher there. The diner owner saw a bandage on her face and asked her about it. She said she got it from being hit by a surfboard, which made sense, but they still couldn't find Armstrong. The investigators acted smartly. They put up several ads saying they were a hotel looking for a yoga teacher. It looked good at first, but after a week of not hearing back, it was time to give up. They left the small town and went back to San Jose to get ready to go back to the United States. But before they could leave, their advertisement caught attention. A yoga teacher in Santa Teresa, who worked in a hotel, said she was interested. That's why they hurried back to the small town and the hotel where the yoga teacher was said to be staying. They sent in just one officer to make sure she wasn't scared and to get a good look at her to make sure she was who she said she was. It looked like he was a stranger, and he only spoke Spanish with her to trick her. In order to do that, she had to use Google Translate on her phone. Whenever she was reading on her phone, the agent would look at her more closely. A bandage was on her nose, and her lips looked bigger than they were, but her eyes were the same. It was her. On June 29, 43 days after she was first reported missing by police, Caitlin Armstrong was captured. She was sent back to a Texas prison, where she was being held on $3 million bail as a flight risk. The police had a hard time finding her because her lips were swollen and she had bandages on her body. It turned out that she had started getting plastic surgery as soon as she arrived in Costa Rica. Armstrong cut her hair short and dyed it brown. She also had surgery that cost more than $6,000. In a locker at the hostel where she was staying, they found her sister's passport and a coupon for a rhinoplasty and eyebrow lift. The rhinoplasty had greatly changed the appearance of her nose. Armstrong tried to avoid before and after photos because she knew they could be used to track her down, but the doctor who performed the surgery insisted. These photographs and their conversations about how she did not want to take them were later used in court. Armstrong, who was 34 years old, had used several fake names and stayed at different hostels to avoid being caught. A man named Teal Ackerson became her boyfriend. After going on a few dates together, Teal noticed that Armstrong liked to go to quiet places, which made sense to him after the truth came out. When he found out who she really was, he said he hadn't recognized her from the U.S. Marshals pictures because she looked so different. A little more than a year after she was caught and just a few weeks before her trial, Caitlin Armstrong got away on October 11, 2023. In the beginning, she trained hard for months in her cell and around the facility, and a lot of it was caught on jail video. Then she carried out her carefully thought-out plan to escape by pretending to hurt her leg. This would get her from her jail cell to a doctor's office in town. Police think she faked an injury to her leg so she wouldn't have to wear leg braces. When the appointment was over and they were walking to the transport van, she got away from the 2 police officers who were with her. She ran more than a block and tried to climb a 6-foot wall, but failed. Officers were able to pull her back down to the ground after her striped uniform pants fell off while she was climbing the wall. Underneath her trousers, she was seen wearing thermal pants, which she had worn to blend in with the crowd during her escape. Caitlin Armstrong's trial began November 1, 2023. Prosecutors laid out a graphic timeline of the events that led to the fatal shooting, starting with Armstrong accessing Strickland's email and Instagram accounts, and how she stood over Anna Mariah to fire the final shot into her heart. As evidence of her time on the run, they showed a bill for plastic surgery and Google searches for things like, can pineapples leave fingerprints? She also searched online to see if her phone could be tracked if she wasn't using it to make calls. All of this suggested she was trying to evade capture, but Armstrong's defense team said they had no direct evidence linking her to the murder. No one saw her commit the murder, and there was no CCTV footage of her entering or leaving. They also said the ballistics evidence was incomplete. Police had a theory about what happened and were looking for evidence that matched that theory, they said. Their client was stuck in a nightmare of confusing clues. They said she ran away and tried to hide who she was because she was afraid of her boyfriend. Do you think she might have been a little worried that her boyfriend had killed someone? Fear makes you either fight or run away, and I chose to run away. Colin Strickland was called to testify and proved to be less than accommodating. When it came time to fight for justice for Anna, he was reluctant and aloof, even called arrogant. Everything suggested he was angry because his cycling career was over. He was even rude and aggressive towards the media, first pushing a cameraman's camera so hard that he almost dropped it, and then staggering and stepping on the same cameraman's foot. Ouch. It didn't mean he was guilty, but it didn't do Strickland any good, personally or professionally. Caitlin Armstrong was found guilty by a jury after a 2-week hearing and 2 hours of negotiations. She rejected a plea deal that would have shaved decades off her possible life sentence, meaning she could be released in her 50 or 60. Prosecutors had asked for Armstrong to serve at least 40 years in prison. The jury returned the next day and sentenced her to 90 years in prison, far more than prosecutors had proposed. She was also given a $10,000 fine. She will be released in July 2112, when she will be 124 years old. Caitlin Armstrong is currently serving out her sentence at Dr. Lane Murray Unit, a women's prison located in Gatesville, Texas.
She was last seen alive, just a few hours after putting her children to bed, slipping into what should have been another peaceful night. When a wife mysteriously disappeared without a trace, the idyllic facade of family life quickly crumbled, revealing a darker reality. Just hours before her disappearance, there were strange phone calls and unexpected events that suggested something sinister was brewing. A secret phone, mysterious late-night activity, and conflicting accounts of that fateful night slowly bubbled to the surface. The investigation was complicated further by a lack of physical evidence, making it a challenging puzzle for authorities. What really happened on that fateful night? On the morning of October 30, 2011, Karen Swift's 2 young daughters, Ashley, age 9, and Key, age 6, awoke to find their mother missing from their home. The previous evening, Ashley had called her mother from a friend's house, where she was attending a Halloween sleepover party. Feeling ill and no longer wanting to stay, she asked her mother to pick her up. Karen, who had been at a Halloween gathering herself, drove over to collect Ashley, despite not initially planning to return home that night. By around 2 a.m., the mother and daughter had settled into bed together, ending what seemed to be a relatively uneventful evening. But when the girls woke up the next morning, Karen was gone. Ashley, who had fallen asleep beside her mother, was now with her younger sister Key in a different room. The girls had been moved during the night without waking, leaving a strange and unsettling gap in their memories. Even more troubling, Karen's white 2004 Nissan Murano was also missing. As the hours ticked by and no word came from Karen, concern began to mount. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, 2 separate calls were made to the Dyer County Sheriff's Office to report her missing. One call came from her husband, David Swift, who had been trying to locate her after phoning some of her friends with no luck. The second call was placed by two of those friends, Bill and Kathy Bona, after spotting Karen's car abandoned along Millsfield Highway, less than half a mile from the family's home. When deputies arrived on the scene, they found David Swift already there with the car. He had unlocked it and briefly searched inside, but found no sign of Karen's belongings. Her cell phone, purse, and keys were missing, and there were no immediate signs of struggle. A single rusty screw was found embedded in one of the tires, suggesting that Karen had run over the object, causing the flat. Neither Deputy Alexander nor Sergeant Walker, who soon arrived to assist, found anything obviously amiss within the vehicle. No blood, no broken glass, no indication that a violent act had occurred. A forensic examination by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, later confirmed the absence of any critical physical evidence inside the SUV. Deputy Sheriff Alexander noticed one unusual detail, however. As he prepared to move the car, he discovered that the driver's seat had been adjusted to a height that was comfortable for him. This was odd, considering that Karen Swift would likely have had to move the seat much closer to the steering wheel. This subtle clue immediately raised questions about whether Karen had been the last driver of the car. The search for Karen Swift commenced quickly, expanding out from the site where her car was discovered. In the vicinity of the vehicle, a pair of jeans and a shirt, later confirmed to belong to Karen, were found discarded. Inside the car, her Halloween costume from the party the previous night lay undisturbed. Her abandoned car was located mere minutes from the Swift home, yet there were no reports of anyone having seen her in the intervening hours after she returned with Ashley. Karen's husband, David, informed the police that he had last seen his wife around 2 a.m. when she came home with Ashley. He offered no other details about the night, except that Karen had filed for divorce just 3 weeks earlier. Despite the separation, the couple had continued to live together under the same roof to maintain a sense of normalcy for their 4 children, which included their 2 older sons, Preston and Dustin, from a previous period in their marriage. The Swifts had a complicated relationship. First married in 1989, Karen and David seemed like the quintessential small-town couple, eventually welcoming 2 boys into their family. In 1996, the relationship took a dramatic turn when David began an affair with a co-worker, a liaison that lasted 3 years and resulted in the birth of a child. Karen discovered her husband's infidelity when the child was born, and in 2000, she filed for divorce. The dissolution of their marriage seemed inevitable. But just as the ink dried on their divorce papers, a strange thing happened. The two began to reconcile, and later that same year, they remarried on the anniversary of their original wedding day. This turbulent history added complexity to the investigation, as detectives tried to piece together whether Karen's recent filing for divorce had reignited old tensions or if other darker forces were at play. Though David remained cooperative in the investigation, his past indiscretions and the timing of Karen's disappearance created an air of suspicion around him. Still, no hard evidence ever emerged to definitively tie him to his wife's fate. The second time around, after their reconciliation and remarriage, Karen and David Swift welcomed 2 more children, both girls, Ashley and Key. This seemed to mark a new chapter for the couple, but soon it would be Karen who stepped outside the boundaries of the marriage. She began an affair, flipping the narrative of their tumultuous relationship. In response to Karen's infidelity, David, taking control of the situation, decided that the family needed a fresh start. At that time, the family was living in Arkansas. David quit his job, quickly found another in manufacturing management in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and, without consulting Karen, purchased a new house. The decision to uproot the family was made swiftly and so abruptly that their eldest son, Preston, was left behind to finish out the school year, while the rest of the family packed up and moved to their new home in Tennessee. The house was completely unfamiliar to Karen, who saw it for the first time when she was unloading boxes into it. Despite the sudden and unexpected relocation, Karen adapted to her new environment faster than one might have expected. Allegedly, David preferred that she not work, but the independent and outgoing Karen found ways to earn her own money. She began cleaning houses and doing landscaping work. Her passion for fitness also led her to start teaching aerobics classes, where she quickly became a fixture in her community. Karen's outgoing and cheerful nature helped her make new friends in Dyersburg. Those who knew her described her as a truly selfless person, someone who always put the needs and comfort of others ahead of her own, sometimes to her own detriment. However, despite her apparent strength and resilience, Karen's marriage was once again on rocky ground. The couple's reconciliation hadn't erased their past troubles, and soon it became clear that their relationship was heading for another divorce. Karen, though outwardly maintaining her upbeat demeanor, had become fearful of David's behavior. She confided in some friends about her concerns, mentioning that David had begun stalking her when she went out and would confront her when she spent time with her girlfriends. Nonetheless, Karen downplayed the severity of the situation. She often reassured her friends that there was no reason to be overly concerned. David's behavior was unpredictable, yes, but she told herself and others that she was probably exaggerating the danger in her mind. David's behavior during the investigation added to the growing unease surrounding Karen's disappearance. Following his phone call to report her missing, David met with police for questioning. He arrived with a set of crutches, explaining that a knee injury he had sustained earlier in the year had flared up again in the days leading up to Karen's disappearance. This injury would become a significant point of discussion later, raising questions about David's ability, or inability, to have been involved in Karen's disappearance in a more physical way. During his interview, David made a surprising revelation. He informed detectives that Karen had been using a second secret cell phone. He claimed that this phone had been given to her by Bill Bona, the husband of her friend Kathy. David didn't know the number of this phone, but suggested that its existence was evidence of Karen's secretive behavior. From there, David's account took on a darker tone. He implied that Karen's recent social life, particularly her association with the Bonas, had led her down a troubling path. He described her as a heavy drinker and a partier, seemingly intent on tarnishing her reputation. According to David, Karen's behavior had changed dramatically after their move to Dyersburg, and he blamed her new friends for this transformation. David told story after story about what he perceived as Karen's erratic and inappropriate behavior. One particularly bizarre tale involved him walking in on Karen naked in their hot tub. Another incident he recounted to detectives involved him finding Karen naked in bed with Kathy Bona. While these stories seemed intended to paint Karen in a negative light, the detectives grew increasingly frustrated with David's narrative, which seemed more focused on disparaging his wife than on helping them understand her disappearance. As the interview continued, the detectives attempted to refocus David's attention on the key question: where could Karen have gone if she had left the house after he went to bed? David, rather than offering any concrete ideas, once again pointed the finger at Kathy Bona, claiming that Kathy had informed him that Karen's phone had pinged by the Mississippi River. According to David, this information had supposedly come from the police themselves, but there was no confirmation of this claim. His suggestion that Kathy had some inside knowledge of Karen's whereabouts only deepened the detectives' suspicions about his evasive answers. When David finally left the police station, crutches in hand, he agreed to allow investigators into his home for a walkthrough. The search of the Swift home revealed nothing of immediate significance. There were no signs of foul play, no bloodstains, no broken furniture or anything to indicate a violent struggle had taken place. The house itself was somewhat untidy, particularly in the downstairs bedroom where Karen slept, but nothing was out of the ordinary for a household with young children. Like the forensic examination of Karen's car, the search of the home failed to provide any solid clues as to what had happened to Karen that night. While the walkthrough didn't yield any new evidence, the growing tension surrounding David's stories and the lack of concrete answers left detectives with more questions than answers. As the investigation progressed, David's attempts to control the narrative around Karen's life and disappearance would come under greater scrutiny. His quick judgment of Karen's new social circle and his focus on her behavior painted a stark contrast to the woman her friends described, someone who had always been caring, responsible, and devoted to her children, even amidst personal turmoil. While David's perspective offered one version of events, it left many wondering whether there was more to the story than what he was willing to share. Outside of the Swift family home, investigator Terry McCree made a discovery that would later raise suspicions: 7 gallons of bleach. David Swift provided an explanation, saying that the bleach was necessary because of an incident involving his dogs. A neighbor of the Swifts, John Hogshuter, had been arrested on the same day as Karen's disappearance on charges of animal cruelty. He was accused of poisoning the Swifts' dogs along with other neighborhood pets. Hogshuter later claimed that the poisoning had been accidental, asserting that he didn't even know what the Swifts' dogs looked like. According to Hogshuter, he had placed fly killer around his property to deal with the flies that had gathered around construction materials in his yard. David had used the bleach to clean up the vomit left by the poisoned dogs. Though this seemed to satisfy investigators initially, the bleach was not taken into evidence, but Hogshuter's involvement in Karen's disappearance became a point of interest. While McCree searched the property, he also discovered divorce papers tucked under a tire in the back of David's vehicle. The papers that Karen handed David indicated that their marriage was in the process of being divorced. As the days turned into weeks and there were no signs of Karen, detectives grew increasingly frustrated. They asked David Swift to return to the station for another round of questioning. By this time, David had provided multiple versions of the events surrounding the last time he saw his wife. His stories varied in minor but significant ways. Initially, he claimed he hadn't actually seen Karen, only spoken to her from the top of the stairs. Later, he said that he had indeed seen her, though he couldn't remember what she was wearing. In his most recent account, he offered more detail, saying he saw her clearly and could describe her clothing. The inconsistencies were subtle but concerning, and they only deepened the investigators' suspicion. As the interview came to an end, David inquired about the state of the investigation. He was told that the search for Karen was still ongoing, though progress was slow. The case continued to drag on for months with few new leads. However, a breakthrough came when Trooper Jason Page made a significant discovery. 2 cell phones were found in a wooded area 145 feet off Hardness Road, approximately 500 feet from the Swift family home. Both phones, Karen's regular Verizon phone and the second secret phone, known as the Voyager, were recovered in close proximity to each other, between the location of Karen's abandoned vehicle and her home. The cell phone data turned out to be crucial. Investigators learned that David had installed a signal extender in the family home, a device that boosted cellular signals in their rural area. This extender automatically connected any phone within its range, logging the time and date of each connection. Through this data, detectives were able to establish a timeline. Karen's Verizon phone connected to the extender just after 2 a.m. on October 30, confirming that she had returned home with her daughter Ashley after picking her up from the sleepover. The phone disconnected from the extender at 4:38 a.m., indicating it had left the house. By 5:09 a.m., the phone had gone off the network entirely and was never turned on again. When it was discovered, the phone had been partially crushed, perhaps run over or smashed against the ground. Witnesses first reported seeing Karen's vehicle pulled over on the roadside just minutes later, around 5:15 a.m. The second phone, the Voyager, presented even more puzzling clues. It also connected to the house's signal extender, but at 9:55 a.m., a full 5 hours after Karen's main phone had been turned off. At that time, a single call was made from the Voyager to check the phone's voicemail. Shortly afterward, this phone also ended up discarded in the same wooded area as Karen's primary phone. The fact that both phones were found together so close to the Swift house raised unsettling questions. The bonus, who had given Karen the Voyager phone, explained to investigators that they had done so to help her communicate privately with her divorce attorney. They said that David had been controlling and sought to monitor Karen's every move. They had also lent her money to hire the attorney and file for divorce. While the phones provided valuable information, the case remained unsolved for several more weeks. Then, on December 10, 2011, a critical discovery was made. John Robinson, a preacher at the Boga Church of Christ, along with his friend Mark Rickman, were leaving Blado Cemetery when they noticed something unusual beneath a thick cover of kudzu vines. Upon closer inspection, they realized they had found human remains. The cemetery, less than 3 miles from the Swift home, was a remote and overgrown area, making it an ideal location to conceal a body. Investigators were quickly called to the scene, and an autopsy confirmed that the remains belonged to Karen Swift. The condition of the body indicated that Karen had likely been killed elsewhere and dragged to the spot where she was found. Her clothing was largely absent, with only her undergarments pushed below her knees, suggesting that they may have been pulled down while her body was dragged across the gravel pathway into the kudzu. Despite the condition of the body, the autopsy revealed no clear signs of sexual assault, and the exact cause of death was difficult to determine due to decomposition. However, it was clear that Karen's death had been the result of a violent attack. After weeks of searching, when Karen Swift's remains were finally discovered, the medical examiner was unable to definitively state her exact cause of death due to the state of decomposition. However, the examination revealed that Karen had sustained blunt force trauma to the head. The pathologist determined that the blow was delivered with a heavy, unknown object while Karen was against a hard surface. This injury would have been fatal if Karen were alive at the time it was inflicted, which strongly suggested that the attack had been intentional and violent. The case, which had been treated as a missing person investigation, was officially reclassified as a homicide, though the weapon used to kill Karen was never recovered. David Swift, Karen's husband, remained the primary suspect in the investigation. From the beginning, investigators found it suspicious that David never participated in the searches for his wife. His behavior was peculiar, yet despite their suspicions, detectives could not find any concrete evidence. The search of the family home, property, and vehicles